You are listening to the best, the only place to be on Tuesday night. That's right, you're listening to The Right Stuff, and you're at the right place at the right time. From England to Canada, from Detroit to the Poconos, we are showcasing Christian authors worldwide, giving you tips, tools, techniques, and resources for you, the writer, to hone and perfect your craft. Tune in every Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time right here on WPJC 104.5. And your host, Parker J. Cole. Hi, and welcome to the show. You're at the right place at the right time. I'm your host, Parker J. I'm so excited you're able to join me today. We're going to have an absolutely wonderful, fantastic time with my returning guest co-host and contributor, Piper Hughley. You know, I always enjoy having Piper on this show. We have such a great time. She's a woman of great knowledge and great wisdom. She's going to impart some of that with us today on the show. So stay tuned right there, and you will have a great time with me and Piper on The Right Stuff here. You know, last week I mentioned to you guys that I had some great things happening with the shows and everything. So I want to let you know that Right Stuff and the Parker J. Cole Show are now under the umbrella of PJC Media. And so that means that we are now a network that's going to be working toward building our network brand. And so I'm going to give you more information about that and more exciting news in the coming weeks, but I'm really excited about that. If you want to join the PJC Media social hookup, you can just go to PJC Media on Facebook.com, join the group, and you'll see what's happening with PJC Media. I'm really excited to ask for your prayers and covet your prayers with this move to becoming a network, and I appreciate all the support that you give me as you continue to listen to The Right Stuff. Also, today, tomorrow, and Thursday, my book, Green is the New Gray, which is a deluxe edition of Many Strange Women, will be free for download for ebook. So simply go to Green is the New Gray on Amazon.com. Go ahead and download your copy. If you haven't had a chance to read my book, Many Strange Women, you also get an additional deleted scene from a short story called The Arrangement that is included in Green is the New Gray. Go ahead and get a copy of that today and leave some feedback. I really love it when you guys leave reviews. Authors love it when you leave reviews. So please leave a review. If you hate it, if you love it, leave a review. I would love to get your feedback. And as always, if you want to weigh in on our topic, you certainly can. Call in at 646-668-8485 and then press 1 to be live on air. Or if you hit me on Twitter at Parker J. Cole, #RightStuff with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break, and we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere. More with Parker and her guests on the Right Stuff Radio Show. We'll be
authors. Are you looking for a new way to get your book in the hands of new audience of targeted buyers? Then a virtual book tour is for you. Right now, virtual book tours is an excellent opportunity for you to introduce your book and who you are as an author. Launching your book is very important. A virtual book tour will connect you with readers. We at WNL, we specialize in book tours, book blasts, radio tours, cover reveals, and Facebook chat. Promoting and marketing your book is what we do. Online publicity, the exposure and the publicity is what you need. Let us help you reach new readers and a new audience. We take care of everything so you don't have to. We set up the tour for you. We connect you with bloggers to advertise your book by way of interviews, guest posts, and reviews. If you are an author of a newly published book, have an upcoming release, or just want to give a previously published book new life, a virtual book tour is your answer. Check our tours out at www.wnlbooktours.com. Visit me on Facebook. I am the owner, Paulette Harper.
Question: if you write a book, everybody will rush out to buy it. Obvious answer, no. If you were a celebrity or if you had a huge marketing budget, then maybe you can get a lot of exposure for your book. Another solution would be to check out joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com is a promotion and marketing service with access to over 1/3 followers on Twitter. joeytweets.com has 3 packages available to fit any budget. That's joeytweets.com. joeytweets.com. Get some serious exposure for your books.
Hi, and we're back to the show. You're listening to The Right Stuff here on WPJC 104.5, part of the All Know PJC Media Network, and I'm so glad you're able to join me today. Like I said before the break, we're going to have an absolutely awesome time with my guest co-host and contributor, Piper Hughley, and Piper is just a very good friend of mine. I'm a fan of her work, and I'm always so glad to have her on the show. So without further ado, I want to introduce Piper to our listeners today. So Piper, how are you doing today? Hey, Piper.
Hey.
There you go. Sorry about that. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Right. And I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us on the show today. We always love having you on The Right Stuff. Like I said, you're such a support to me and a mentor to me, and I really appreciate you being on the show with us to let people know what your work is about, what you're doing, and what you're trying to bring about to new readers about African-American history, African-American romance, and African-American story as it relates to U.S. history and actually history worldwide. So I'm really glad you're here to kind of help us unpack this topic about this idea, because it seems as if there's a very subtle trend to try to get rid of the impact of African Americans and other minorities, not just African Americans, but other minorities in the book of history that makes up our country for whatever reason. I don't know why people want to do that. So I want to really talk about this topic, really unpack it, because some of our listeners may be listening and saying, what are you talking about? No one's trying to do that. I just saw a Black History thing on the TV today. So how can you say they're not contributing to history? So go ahead, in your own words, tell us who you are so we can at least know the credentials that come behind your name.
I am a professor at Spelman College, and I teach, one of the things I teach besides literature and composition, I also teach what we call an interdisciplinary course. And the interdisciplinary course that the school runs a year, and it teaches all about the history, the sociology, the politics, that's all of the disciplines, that's why it's called interdisciplinary, together, of the people who are descendants of Africa all across the diaspora in terms of the world. So that's what I teach, and that's what where my credentials come from in terms of thinking about how history is brought across in the class.
And so, our listeners are listening in and say, okay, so she's pretty smart, which is no surprise to me. So you understand about the African-American influence in not just the U.S., but across the world. So there's this huge minority group here. And now, mind you, for our listeners, we're just focusing on African Americans today, but this also inclusive of other minority groups. So we don't want to make it look like, we're the only minorities on the planet, But we want to definitely talk about this, because if it can happen to African American histories and African American biographies and contributions, what's not to say that something else can happen to Asian Americans or Latin Americans or any other group on the planet that people try to rewrite history to not include you, because we all are part of this thing. That's why we titled the show All God's Children, because all God's children get the opportunity to contribute to society. All God's children get that opportunity to do that. Now, some may not, and some may, but you don't want to write them off or try to downplay their accomplishments. And so how do you see this happening in today's world with this revisionist history that's coming about?
Well, I think part of the problem that is happening right now is that history is declining in importance in the larger culture. And when this is happening, where, for instance, at the school, besides this course, students can choose whether or not they take another historical course. Rather than having it be a required part of the curriculum, they can choose or not whether to take it, and that's not the way it used to be. But this kind of move in terms of not requiring it, but allowing students to choose, is how I think it begins to decline in importance. And so, and I've taught in other places, And it's certainly the case at other schools where students can choose a historical course or they can choose some other humanity. And it's not to denigrate the other humanities, but in terms of people having a firm understanding, and this is for every one of us, how our country was put together, how it was built, how we became strong economically, all of those things are dependent upon a strong understanding of history. And if you don't have that going forward, it's hard to know how to continue forward without a thorough understanding of the past. And so with that kind of thing happening, then we begin to lose sight of how people have made contributions in terms of understanding the full and the complete United States story. And this is how we begin to see, is what you called it, a revisionist history taking its place. So, this is one of the reasons why it becomes increasingly important that if we're not requiring students in high school, college, whatever, to take history, that somehow the information gets out in some way.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Piper, because it's horrific. Because back in the day, when I was in school, I just learned history. History is fascinating to me. As I've gotten older, I love the ladder that history brings to me. When it comes to especially family history, and then you see the family history on par with state history, and then you see it on par with local history, and then you see it on par with United States history. Like recently, for example, Piper, my grandfather passed away, and I think a lot of people who follow me on Facebook understand my grandfather passed away. I found out that he was a World War II vet, and he also received a Bronze Star during that time, and he was active in the Burma conflict during World War II. And so that made me interested in wanting to know more about World War II, what was Burma about, and then what about the Bronze Star. And apparently it's a high honor to gain that kind of reward. And so that just connected me to my grandfather. So even though that he's dead, his legacy lives on through me. So if I succeed, he succeeds. And if my children ever have any, if they succeed, because we have this legacy that's passed down over and over again, how much more would be understanding history as a whole, as it affects our country, as it affects our nation, as it affects our world, how much more important it is to know that, because if you know the history, you can make sure you don't make the same mistakes of history, or you can make better decisions for the present and the future.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up family history, because certainly when my students begin to express an interest in history, one of the first things I ask them, or at least mandate and I tell them in the fall, okay, it's November and your Thanksgiving vacation is coming up. Now, what I want you to do is go home and speak to all of the elders in your family so that they can begin to get that sense of where they came from. And just like you said, make the connections between the things that their elders did that helped to support the structure of society. That's a very important thing to do. And I've seen people talk about, I'm getting all wrapped up in ancestry this and all this other stuff that, and I'm like, hold up. Have you first? Have you done the first thing and spoken to the elders? They are the keepers of the family history. They are the ones who know, and you have to go, and even if they sometimes seem reluctant, so that if you just hang around them, you can get whatever it is, the secrets, the story, everything that you need to know to help substantiate your life and to carry forward. That is so, so important. And you never know what's going to happen. Like you said, your grandfather died, and I'm so sorry for your loss. But he knew things, and once he's gone, that information is gone. So I learned that relatively young. I'm glad to say that. I was always the young one pestering the elder people. And then when I went and got all their stuff and I got married, I pestered all of his older people. And then I was like, "What crazy girl, you done married?"
love it, Piper.
I wanted to get that information for my son, So, like you said, so that something didn't happen to it and it was lost. So, yeah.
And that's important. That's totally important. I remember, too, on my other grandfather's side, my mom's side, my mother's side of the family, one of his brothers was actually lynched. And I think I told you about this just online. He was lynched, and it was a public event that was reported in newspapers. And there was a lot of racial tension during that time. I think it was in Florida. I can't remember right off the bat, but I think it was in Florida. And so that led to a series of choices that my grandfather made that led him up here to Michigan. And so when you start to, that's just family history. And so that flows through you. And it makes you say, you know what, I have to succeed because there are others who will want to be in the position that I'm in today. And that's with anybody, with any minority group. And you see the struggles of your ancestors from the past, which is why you have to succeed. And knowing that family history, knowing how that impacted the local history, knowing how that impacted the state history or the country history, when you see that one person is part of this bigger story, and then you understand why it's so important for you to make the right decisions, to go ahead and succeed, to go ahead and finish school, go ahead and go to college, go ahead and go to become whatever your dreams are. Don't let them rot. Wouldn't you say that, Piper?
Yes, definitely I would. That is so important.
What we're going to do now is take a quick short break, and when we come back, we'll read some of your questions and comments with my guest co-host and contributor, Piper Hughley. If you want to weigh in on our topic, you certainly can. Feel free to call in at 646-668-8485 and press 1 to be live on air, or hit me on Twitter at ParkerJCo, #RightStuff, with your questions and comments. We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Have you read the latest issue of SORMAG Digital, the award-winning literary magazine for multicultural readers and writers? SORMAG Digital is available quarterly and showcases interviews with the best authors in multicultural literature. SORMAG Digital features craft and business articles for those interested in writing. If you're looking for a good book, check out our book reviews on what's hot in multicultural literature. For writers looking for new readers to get in front of, SORMAG Digital is the perfect place to introduce your book. We offer advertising spaces that fit your promotional budget. Get your free subscription on SORMAG.com or order a print issue on MagCloud.com. If you would like more information about SORMAG Digital, check us out on SORMAG.com or contact us at SORMAG@yahoo.com. SORMAG Digital is the magazine for multicultural readers and writers.
Engaging the culture's imagination through speculative fiction, the Untold Podcast produces audio fiction from a Christian worldview. Find us over at untoldpodcast.com, where we partner with authors to tell science fiction, fantasy, supernatural, and horror stories. Find links at untoldpodcast.com to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, and a variety of other platforms. Each month we produce high-quality audio fiction that's free to download and free to listen. Our submissions are open, and we're always looking to add another great story to over 24 hours of narrative entertainment. Find all of our audio fiction over at www.untoldpodcast.com.
Hi, and welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Right Stuff here on WPJC 104.5. I'm so glad you're able to join me today. We're having a fantastic time with my guest co-host and contributor, Piper Hughley. She is a professor at Spelman as well as the author of several African-American Christian inspirational romances. Her newest one today is called Migrations of the Heart, which deals with African-Americans during the 1910s through the 1930s and 40s. And so, Piper, I want to again thank you so much for joining us on the show to talk about this topic of history.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before the break, we were talking about the importance of history. We were talking about how there are those powers that be that want to get rid of the contributions of others that make up this great nation. And the nation is great despite the very many flaws that are involved with it. This is a great nation. If you think about it, on a time scale, America is only a couple hundred years old, as opposed to Britain, as opposed to some of the Asian countries that have been around for a while. And so here in such a short time, America has made a huge impact on world economy, world politics, governance, all kind of things have happened with America in such a short amount of time. And mind you, we do understand that the Founding Fathers were not perfect, but they did a lot of things that were just radical at the time. I mean, you got 13 colonies basically telling a country that's been around for thousands of years that you are not lord over us anymore. And we went to war over it. And so you have this history, and in the makeup of this history are African Americans who contribute to that. And so you got people who may want to get rid of the contributions of others. Why do you think a person or an entity will want to get rid of the contributions of others in our country?
Well, I think there's a tendency as human beings to want to uplift or put forward the viewpoints of people who look most like us, or maybe it's more accurately worded, those who've come before us in terms of our ancestry. And it's fine to do that, but as you're saying, to do that at the expense of others without telling a more complete story, a fuller story, is a problem, and sort of not acknowledging the things that others did in support of a goal or a particular type of circumstance is missing information. And sort of that's what I see myself doing in terms of not necessarily, and this is how some people put it, that, I'm somehow downplaying the history of the great men, so to speak, is where that particular point of view. Just as you said, the Founding Fathers made some great contributions, and there's no doubt of that.
Exactly.
But Thomas Jefferson would not have been able to write the Declaration of Independence had he not had a number of enslaved people looking after Monticello, etc., so that it could ensure that it continued to have the crops come in, so that he could be fed, all of that other kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's the complete picture, and that's what we need to know. So.
And I like how you mentioned that, because these are little known facts that people may not understand, because we like the big hoopla of it. But history is everything. It's the little bitty things that people do. And like you said, he couldn't have did that if there wasn't any, slaves running around taking care of the house. And then we won't go into the other parts of his very illustrious background. Some of you know what I'm talking about. We're going to leave it alone.
Part, but that was before all that. So.
Okay. I tell you, sometimes history can be the biggest soap opera on planet Earth. When you start to peel back the veil on history, you go, whoa, this is a soap opera from back in the 1800s. They just had different clothes.
I marvel when people say that it's boring, because I'm like, are you kidding me?
It's fascinating, because people really don't change. That's the interesting thing. People really don't change, but they give the illusion of change. And people generally are pretty much the same. And so you find out that what hurts people back 200 years ago still hurts people now. We may have more apathetic attitude toward it, but it still hurts. And then something will happen that'll break the apathy away from us. So let's kind of get into some of our comments that we received from supporters. And I asked the question, Piper, whether or not the contributions of minority groups through the U.S. history are adequately represented or silenced. And so I wanted to get some responses. In Nigeria, thank you so much for your comment. Nigeria says the contributions of minorities are silenced, and if they are recognized, usually there is only one voice selected to represent their contributions. Nigeria, thank you so much for that comment. Piper, do you want to comment on that?
I'm not quite sure what Nigeria refers to in terms of one voice. This is one of the reasons why, like, for instance, in the class that I spoke about, that we try to ensure a wide representation of historical background across the diaspora. So the class covers the experiences, like, not just in the United States, but in Great Britain and in Africa and the Caribbean, even in India, which, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily think about Africans in India and their experience, but they were there. And that has to be studied. That has to be talked about. So I don't know what the exact circumstances are in terms of, or happens to be when she's talking about one voice being selected. I probably would need to know a little bit more before I could adequately respond.
And then we did get another comment from Jeremy. Jeremy says, I think this question can no longer be answered simply because very few people since MLK, Martin Luther King, have been able to answer it without bias toward the party of their choice. MLK approached the problem of minority oppression in a very balanced way, seeking true equality between minority and majority rather than seeking privilege for one group to the exclusion of all other groups. Today, that approach has been all but lost. Rather than seeking true equality between majority and minority regarding race, creed, orientation, economic standing, what have you, those who claim to fight inequality do not work to erase the lines between the haves and the have-not, but instead seek to redistribute rights and privileges from the haves to the have-not. This approach does not eliminate inequality, but it only shifts the inequality. In the words of MLK, it does not encourage judgment by the content of character rather than color of skin or whatever other dividing line you wish, but instead reemphasizes that dividing line in a more favorable light, swinging discrimination to the other side. And then he says, he goes, going back to the topic, depends on who you talk to. If you're talking to someone or some group without bias, then yes, I think all groups are ultimately represented well. But I don't believe that all groups are represented in a balanced fashion because you'd have to be hard-pressed to find such a balanced group. Jeremy, thank you so much for that comment. Did you want to respond to that, Piper?
Well, it's interesting that Jeremy is using an economic type of approach to the question. Sort of the whole aspect of economics, I think, does have a particular impact upon who has a voice and who doesn't in terms of that. And it seems that the folks who have more money in their pockets are the ones who tend to get the voice, are the ones where you hear more of their particular perspective. So this whole notion of being hard-pressed, I think for people who are not trying, and that's not to say that, that happens, but there are people for whom their particular viewpoint seems to benefit them without a fuller understanding of what is going on. As I said, the voices that seem to come across to us loudest across history are those where their economic circumstances assisted them. For instance, just an easy example, those who had education, for instance, which prior to the development of public educational institutions meant that people with money were able to have tutors come into their homes and teach them. That took money, as opposed to those who didn't have that. And I'm not necessarily just talking about, as far as the United States is concerned, the enslaved, who certainly were not permitted in education in any type of fashion, but even those who were not rich and still did not have access to education because they couldn't afford, say, a tutor, or they could only learn in a piecemeal type of fashion. Those are things that we as a society, I think, still in the South are paying for in terms of the educational quality. So if we don't seek to try to learn multiple perspectives, it's at our peril, I believe. So that's my response to him.
And if you want to weigh in on our topic, you certainly can. Simply call in at 646-668-8485 and then press 1 to be live on air. If you're holding online and you want to make a comment, just simply press 1. Or hit me on Twitter at ParkerJ, hashtag Right Stuff, with your questions and comments. Now, Pipe, I'm going to read a comment from Sheila. Sheila says this: Black history was created in 1926 to educate our children on the accomplishments of blacks who have played a significant and important role in the building of America in every aspect of life: medicine, political, education, entertainment, finance, arts, engineering. Blacks have created in. However, we have focused on certain icons from our historical past. Schools must integrate Black history in every subject. It should not be just a month of historical information, but every day. Emphasis should not only be taught on what we know, but on the events, people, and places that we do not. We can start history by learning about our own families. Family knowledge is the hidden history for most people. That's why I enjoy the program, Finding Your Roots. It gives the individual a starting point of their ancestors. That's what history is about. Sheila, thank you so much for your comment. Piper, you want to respond?
Yes, I happened to see Sheila's comment earlier, and I absolutely agree. And we had spoken about the importance of family history in terms of that. And other people have given this particular viewpoint in terms of considering interweaving or the intermingling of the accomplishments of African Americans, not just focusing on it in February, but year-round, which is certainly a great and wonderful idea and is true. We really should. It's still American history, and that certainly cannot be discounted. One of the examples I always like to point out is that if anybody likes to watch Jeopardy, notices that when they have a category, it's like Black America or something like that, and if the players tend to avoid that category, and then it's the only thing that's left, and then.
I'm sorry. I'll get
not that category. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, how many times I've watched Jeopardy over the years, and this the same phenomenon happens, and it's like, and then they go to the category because there's no other questions, and they run it. They know every single question because it's in history, right? Yeah. So I mean, if we just had that attitude rather than, oh my gosh, there it is, it's February, or that attitude that, as she's pointing out, learning more about these individuals who have made these accomplishments part of the American fabric. I mean, just offhand, thing like stoplights. The Eric Morgan, a Black man, did that. Just something like that. Just knowing that. Enhances and enriches all of us, because then it's caused less accidents. So.
Yeah. Think about it. If we didn't have that, we'd probably all be running into each other today. It's the small things in life you treasure, right?
Small things. Exactly.
We're going to go ahead and take a quick short break. We are having a great time with my guest co-host and contributor, Piper Hughley. She is the professor of African American history and literature at Spelman College, as well as the author of different series of African American history and romance, and you definitely want to get a copy of any of her books today. When we come back from the break, we'll be talking more about Piper's work. If you have a question for her, feel free to call in at 646-668-8485 and press 1 to be live on air. We'll be right back after these messages.
Are you a reader looking for more compelling Christian fiction? Maybe something a little more edgy or a bit more real? Are you tired of most Christian fiction shying away from the truth and settling for a rose-tinted view of the world and its issues? Or are you an author who has a compelling story to tell, but you're afraid it doesn't jive with today's brand of Christian or secular fiction? Are you tired of Christian publishers telling you that your content is too edgy? Or maybe you've tried submitting your content under the radar to secular publishers only to be told your themes are a bit too religious. We invite you to take a look at the Crossover Alliance. We are an online publishing company that specializes in edgy Christian speculative fiction with Christian themes and real-world content. Our company is formed from authors and readers just like you who are breaking into the mainstream and Christian markets with this compelling genre. Head over to www.thecrossoveralliance.com for all the details on who we are, what we do, and what we accept. Right now, if you sign up for our email newsletter, you'll receive a free digital copy of our first short story anthology. Check us out today and help us spread the word about the Crossover Alliance, where light shines brighter in the darkness.
Hi. Is your book club in need of some fresh and exciting questions to ask club members and authors at your next book club meeting? Literations, the book conversation game, is 70 thought-provoking questions to really get into an in-depth discussion about the books you and your club members are reading. These questions really get into the characters, the storyline, and into the author's head. These questions may just give you and your book club members a whole new way to get into a new conversation, a literation. Literations is also a great set of tools for bloggers, interviewers, and authors to use as discussion questions. Are you ready to get lit? Please visit our website at litversations.com, LITVERSATION.com. And please like our...
This broadcast of the PJC Media Network seeks to present wholesome, thought-provoking, and entertaining content. However, the views expressed by the hosts of PJC Media are theirs and theirs alone. They do not reflect the views of this network or its affiliates. Please utilize listener discretion. And we are back, and you are listening to The Right Stuff here on WPJC 104.5. We've been having a wonderful, insightful, and just fun conversation with my guest co-host and contributor, Professor Piper Hughley from Spelman College, as well as the author of several African-American historical romances. And Piper, again, thank you so much for joining us on the show, for unpacking this topic and really helping us understand the importance of history and the inclusion of everyone who is involved in making our country what it is today. So thank you for coming back again on the show.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Now, Piper, I want people to know about your work. You know, I'm a fan of your stuff. I'm always hitting up your PM about your newest book, and I absolutely love it. And what I really like about your work is that you bring out little-known facts about African-American contributions to the U.S., and this is so important to know because a lot of people, when they read your stuff, they didn't believe it. And that was the interesting thing. They didn't believe that there were African-Americans going to college before the Civil War. They didn't know that. And so people thought you were making it up. So go ahead, tell us about your books and what it is that you hope to achieve with writing it. Why did you use the romance genre? Go ahead and just lay it all out for us.
Well, I like to say, or sort of put out there in terms of if the ancestors hadn't loved one another, we wouldn't be here. And so my whole sort of approach to why historical romance to deal with both of my series had to do with that, to figure out what are those love stories that brought us here in terms of that. And that even, say, in terms of migrations of the heart, I started that series to begin to try to figure out something that historians vary greatly on in terms of what was the factor, what were the factors that started the Great Migration. And so for people who don't know, the Great Migration is the movement of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North and West. That started right around 1914, 1915, but nobody knows exactly why. And my thought was to use a romance for the eldest daughter of 5 sisters that would mean that she would then move from the South to the North, and that her sisters, via their own love stories, would follow suit. So that was my particular idea for that particular series. And even as that eldest daughter faced her own difficulties in terms of a rape and a child that came from that rape, that she was still able to find her own happiness in a new life elsewhere, which for the sensibility from that African American standpoint was a victory. Sort of other people sort of, she ran away or she left home or whatever. The Great Migration was about people who recognized their value and made a determination to take control of their lives and one of the reasons why they made that move had to do with some of that. And that wasn't everyone who opted to do that, but for those people who did, it was not as much that they were running away as that they said, we're not going to stay and deal with a particular kind of treatment any longer.
It's interesting that you say that, because that is what it is, because they were in a situation, your books show this very eloquently, they're in a situation where people were out of civil war, we're out of slavery, and the country is changing, on a flux. I'm sorry?
For a long time. I mean, this was one of the things that it was 50 years after that. You know, it was like it took them time before they moved. So it wasn't as if,
And I like that because, you know, the country's still in a state of flux, because war does that. Just in general, any war does that. It messes up a country. They got to recover from that. And then you have people who want to move. They say, you know, there are these new opportunities coming. I want to move. And then you have the people who like the old way, who want to keep it the same, who want to keep you down, who want to keep you in a certain place. You have you who want to move forward. And then you have those saying, why are you trying to move forward? Just stay where it's safe. Stay in Egypt. That's what people would say. Stay in Egypt. And so you have that all throughout the migration series. You have that with these 5 sisters. And the 5 sisters, to me, they each represent African Americans' needs during that time. And I really like how you interpose the history as well as the romance in there. Now, real quickly, because I want to touch on at least each book before we have to get going, because it always goes so quickly when we're on the show. With A Virtuous Ruby, you're coming from what era before the migration? And you call it the Red Summer. Why is it called the Red Summer?
Oh, okay. That's for Most Precious Pearl, which is the second book. It's called that because when the World War I veterans returned home, there was a bit of an uptick. There had been a kind of a steady employment of lynching as a particular kind of tactic to keep people silent in terms of looking for more economic opportunities in the South or better education, what have you, a lot of things. But when the World War I veterans returned after having been treated slightly better in Europe, there was an uptick in terms of that. So 1919 is the year, or the summer is called Red Summer, when there was an increased amount of lynching to keep those that silent from speaking their needs or being more activist in their approaches to try to get those needs. So, that's why I set that particular story at that particular point in time, just at the beginning of those events that would then compel Asa, who is the hero of the story, and Mags to investigate those circumstances, but then when the time came to recognize their own value and to take their leave-taking from her southern hometown.
One thing I like about the setting of for Ruby's story, Virtuous Ruby, and A Virtuous Ruby, which is the first of the migration series, Ruby is you don't find out too much later. Should I just tell them? I was going to tell. You don't find out too much later. Okay, because I hate spoilers, but Ruby finds out she's mixed. You know, you find out she's mixed, but her circumstance that she got that way, you'll find out throughout the book, and you find out that here she was playing with her friend at the time. She thought him as a friend. They used to, because she was so bright as a African American, she's bright because of her mixed ancestry. Her and this male friend of hers would play together, and then all of a sudden there's a moment where, because she was trying to get an NAACP chapter in her town, they wanted to shut her up. And this also shows you the female struggles and that they had during that too. And so you got women who were fighting for a voice after the Civil War and after World War I. Then you got African Americans fighting for a voice after this. So you got this clash going on here. So what was kind of your thoughts with A Virtuous Ruby?
Yes, That's exactly it. And that females were certainly not excluded from the capacity of being lynched because they're females. That was certainly not something that, oh, yeah, we're just not going to do that with her or whatever. They wanted her to shut up, and they had certain ways, and when that wasn't going to work, that was the next step. So, yeah, she had to, learn about when to speak and when not to speak, and when she, wasn't able to speak anymore as directly as she might have liked, then that's the other option, is to go elsewhere and work for better conditions from a further distance, which is what a lot of people did in terms of sending money, creating other economic opportunities in their newfound homes for relatives to come there, et cetera, to make better lives. That's what they did. And I think that's an American story. I mean, because, a number of folk come from ancestry who left their homes to come to the United States for better opportunities in a very similar fashion. That's how I think about it.
And then in your book, A Treasure of Gold, you have, I think about 6 or 7 years have passed, maybe a little bit longer have passed, and then you have the third sister, Nettie. Nettie. You have her, and she's coming from the 20s. And the 20s, as you know, was a very prosperous time for the U.S., but it was also a different story for African Americans. And I remember reading one of your reviews, Piper, and someone said, I have never read a story about African Americans in the 20s. I've never read a story like that. And when you think of the 20s, you always think of the flappers, you think of the ritzy kind of glittery clothes, you think about easy street waxed hair. Just all kind of things come to mind, just of the 20s. And then you show underneath the prosperous 20s, there's a subset of African-American history that's going on there, too. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about what's going on in A Treasure of Gold.
Yeah, well, the purpose of Nettie was really to kind of answer questions like, all of that stuff is going on just as you described it. But what if you have somebody who is kind of conservative and repressed and doesn't want to be part of all of that?
Yes. Yes.
So this was part of that. Was like my running joke in the story was the little girl in the story just sort of basically chiding her about her wardrobe because she just refuses to shorten her skirts.
Yes, exactly. I don't want to wear my clothes out like that. Why are you making me?
That whole thing about and there were a lot of people who, held out for those longer skirts for long. In the 30s, a certain amount of that came back, but then went away with World War II because of fabric rationing and all of that other kind of stuff, that there was this, recognition in terms of shorter skirt lengths being more patriotic because of safe fabric. So yeah, it was but for that particular story, but also to show in terms of an African American hero who might have had a particular kind of intelligence, but that society of that time wouldn't necessarily allow him to showcase that in a positive way. And so he's a gangster, really, in terms of, the way that comes out. But he's a gangster who works for good. And I kind of got that idea from these entities that exist all over the world in terms of microcredit entities, when people who don't have access to larger banking institutions, et cetera, as African Americans didn't at that particular point in time, that Jay kind of establishes and becomes his own bank, if you will, which carries with it a certain kind of trust and in someone, and which kind of does make him heroic with that particular sensibility, even as the large society would see him as someone who is operating outside of the law. Is the law really just when everybody's not permitted to participate? So that's how I saw that.
And I like how you did that, because there's these gray areas that exist, because I can't be represented by the law, especially during this time, especially even nowadays. Some people, they can't be represented by the law fully, and so people make a law to themselves, as they say. Now, Piper, before we get ready to end our show, I want to read a couple of comments that we received. Leslie, when we probed the question about whether or not minority groups were adequately represented in U.S. history, Leslie simply said, not adequately taught, and she mentioned Mildred Jefferson. And Leslie, thank you so much for that comment. And then Heather responded, they are definitely not adequately taught. I don't think that they are usually intentionally silenced either. I think that people tend to repeat and teach about the same things they were taught back in the day. They're just not familiar with the stories of the people that they weren't taught about when they were going through school decades ago. And so biased patterns of teaching from the past continue, even though most people teaching these days will probably never intentionally shortchange someone as a historical figure for racial or gender reasons. I teach biology. I mentioned Rosalind Franklin. I certainly never heard about her until I was doing research for my classes. If I stuck to a textbook, I probably still would not know about her contribution, and I wouldn't have taught about her. Heather, thank you so much for that comment. And so we're getting to the end of our show, Piper, and one thing I want you to mention is that here we have this history. Here we have history of African Americans, and I've said before the show, before we start talking, that we're just using African Americans, but this applies to all different minority groups all over, and their contributions to the U.S. history. We're talking about all over the world, and that there are maybe an agenda to keep people in power because, for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. Just for whatever reason, they want to keep them in power, and so. But there is an element here that we haven't talked about, and I think it's probably the most important one, that God doesn't forget the rewards of his children. As we talk about saying that we're all God's children, what could you say about this thing about how God doesn't forget us, no matter who tries to rewrite a history or tell our own story?
Well, I certainly think, and this is what Heather was kind of referring to, that there are ways for this history to emerge. And so this is what I believe she was alluding to in the time to your question of how it is that the contributions, the things that the ancestors did to enable those of us to go to institutions of higher learning, to learn about this and to bring it back full circle is part of, I think, God's blessing in terms of bringing these voices, these people from the past to light. I think we should continue to do that now that you have had approximately 40 years, and this is what she was alluding to, of the scholarship from a different point of view, to continue to bring that to light so that these textbooks can be rewritten, and certainly not rewritten in a revisionist way as we've seen in some places, but rewritten to highlight the contributions of the biologists that she mentioned, to, again, include a more fuller, more rounded circle, include all of his children, all of his points of view, so that we all can be enriched by it. Every one of us can.
Piper, I want to thank you so much for being with us on the show today. I want people to know where they can get a hold of you online. So go ahead, give us your social media outlets.
I'm on Facebook at Piper G. Hughley, and the last name is spelled Huguley. I'm on Twitter at Piper Hughley. Just run that all together. That's the Twitter handle. And my blog, where I talk about the various facets of history behind my novels, is piperhughley.com, PiperHuguley.com.
Piper, again, thank you so much for being with us on the show. I remember when I first had you on the show, you were just releasing Lawyer's Luck and Preacher's Promise, and since then you've gone on to write more books, you've won awards, and you've been recognized for your work in expanding diverse fiction, along with Vanessa Riley and some other ones, especially I'm going to be very blunt, our matriarch of this will be Beverly Jenkins, who kind of helped to bring about this along. So I don't want to not mention her as well, because if she didn't do it, we wouldn't do it. Because she kind of paved the road for that. Even though she writes in a different genre, she paved the road for that, and including African American history and fiction. I want to thank you for the call that God has put on you to let these bits of history be known so they can continue to be known throughout U.S. history and the world. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Parker.
And we were talking today to Piper Hughley. She is the author of the Migrations of the Heart series. You can get it on Amazon.com. Simply type in Piper Hughley. That's Huguley. And if you want to follow her on Twitter, you certainly can. Simply go to @PiperHughley and then follow her website. She has all the information, historical nuggets that go behind the scenes of her books. Go to piperhughley.com. We hope to have her back real soon. She's a blessing. And if you haven't had a chance to read those books, you'll be so surprised at how much information there is about African American history. And if you're from another different minority or ethnic group and you know your history that affects the U.S., I want you to pick up the pen, go ahead and write it. Mix it in with romance. Mix it in with some other genre. It doesn't matter. Don't let your history, whatever that is, be silenced. Don't let that history be taken away by anyone. We are all God's children. We have the right to have those contributions that we make to this country known to the world, whether it's to the world or anyone else. We want our story to be told. You don't want anyone else to tell your story. You tell your story. So if you're of a different minority group, you're listening to the sound of my voice, God is calling you to write, go ahead. Pick up the pen and write that history. Interweave in fiction. Go ahead and write a nonfiction book about it. It doesn't matter. Don't let anyone else tell your story. Don't forget to join me on Saturday for the Parker J. Cole Show. All month we've had Relationship Month. This week we'll be talking about friends and others. So you definitely want to join me Saturday at 2 o'clock p.m. right here on WPJC 104.5. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of The Right Stuff. You have a wonderful day, and God bless. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The Right Stuff. Follow Parker online at parkerjcole.com. To hear this show and other shows, visit the show archive at therightstuffradio.wordpress.com. We'll be back same time next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Time.